Sold, the auctioneer announced with a lazy smile, letting a single silver coin ring across the weathered stone platform as though it were worth more than the young woman standing before him. The sound echoed through Iron Hollow Market, lingering beneath rows of faded banners that fluttered in the cool morning breeze while merchants called out prices for horses, grain, and handcrafted tools. For one brief heartbeat, the entire square seemed to listen to that lonely metallic chime. Evelyn Carter lowered her eyes, refusing to let the strangers surrounding the platform witness the sting behind them. She had once believed humiliation had limits. She had once believed that after being rejected by her destined mate before the entire Silver Ridge pack, after hearing whispers that she was weak, cursed, and unworthy, nothing else could possibly hurt more. She had been wrong. There was always another step downward when people decided your life carried less value than your dignity. The iron bracelet around her wrist felt heavier than it truly was, not because of its weight, but because it represented the final thread connecting her to the home that had erased her name before sunrise. Hours earlier, she had still been an unwanted daughter of the pack. Now she was simply inventory. Buyers wandered past without slowing, examining her the same way they inspected worn wagons or aging livestock. Some barely glanced at her before shaking their heads and moving on. Others laughed quietly, amused that an Omega could stand so straight despite having absolutely nothing left. Evelyn kept her shoulders lifted anyway. It was the only thing no one had managed to take from her. Above the market, gray clouds drifted across the autumn sky, softening the morning sunlight until every building looked washed in pale silver. The crisp air carried the scent of pine, chimney smoke, and fresh bread from a nearby bakery. Ordinary people continued ordinary lives only yards away, children chasing one another between wooden barrels while families argued over apples and blankets, completely unaware that a person's future had just been exchanged for a single coin. The old man who had offered that coin stepped quietly toward the platform. His cloak was plain brown wool, faded by countless winters, and his silver beard reached the center of his chest. He did not smile with triumph the way the other bidders might have. Instead, he looked at Evelyn with calm eyes that held neither pity nor contempt. That unsettled her more than cruelty ever could. "Come," he said gently as the auctioneer unlocked the iron clasp around the platform rail. "The road is long." Evelyn hesitated before stepping down. The crowd had already lost interest, turning toward another seller announcing expensive hunting dogs from the northern valleys. To them, the story had ended the moment the coin changed hands. No one cared where she would go next. No one wondered whether she would ever smile again. As she walked beside the quiet stranger, the single silver coin disappeared into the auctioneer's pocket, forgotten almost instantly by everyone except Evelyn. Somehow, she felt certain she would remember its sound for the rest of her life. Behind them, the market grew smaller with every step until only distant voices floated through the cool wind. Ahead stretched an old forest road lined with towering pines whose branches whispered together high above the wagon trail. The stranger never hurried. He never tightened the loose rope connecting her wrist to his wagon. It was almost as if he believed she would choose to stay. Evelyn looked once over her shoulder toward the town disappearing behind the trees. Nothing waited for her there anymore. She whispered a silent farewell to the girl she used to be and faced the road ahead, unaware that before the sun disappeared beyond those same pine-covered hills, the most powerful alpha king in the Northern Territories would speak her name as though it had always belonged beside a crown. Evelyn walked beside the old wagon without speaking, her worn boots brushing against fallen pine needles that softened the narrow forest road. The rope resting loosely around her wrist never tightened, and after nearly a mile she realized the elderly man had not looked back a single time to make certain she was still following. It was a strange kind of trust, one she no longer understood. Trust had disappeared from her life the morning her own pack decided she was worth less than their reputation. The silence allowed memories to return whether she welcomed them or not. She remembered running through the hills as a little girl with wind tangling her pale blonde hair, while her father laughed and promised that every wolf carried value beyond strength alone. He had served as a respected council elder, admired for fairness instead of fear, and whenever disagreements divided the pack, neighbors gathered around his porch because they believed wisdom should always speak louder than pride. After the fever claimed his life 3 winters ago, everything changed with quiet, relentless speed. Leadership shifted. Old promises faded. Friends stopped visiting. Those who once greeted Evelyn with warm smiles suddenly lowered their voices whenever she passed. Her first mating ceremony should have marked the beginning of adulthood. Instead, it became the day every hopeful dream unraveled. Before the gathered families beneath the full moon, the young alpha chosen by destiny had stepped backward rather than forward, declaring that he refused to bind his future to an omega who possessed no remarkable gifts, no influential family, and no future worth sharing. The rejection had spread across the crowd like a cold wind. No one defended her. Some looked away. Others simply nodded as though the decision confirmed what they had secretly believed all along. From that evening forward, she was given the smallest chores, the oldest clothes, and the faintest hope that life could ever become more than quiet survival. Yet even after losing nearly everything, Evelyn never stopped helping where she could. She carried water for elderly neighbors whose own children never visited. She rescued frightened animals trapped beneath broken fences after storms. She spent evenings reading stories to orphaned pups who waited for parents that would never return. None of those kindnesses changed how the pack saw her. Compassion, they insisted, could not replace power. Eventually, the new council declared that every mouth had to earn its place. Since Evelyn no longer served any meaningful purpose, selling her to traveling traders would provide supplies before winter arrived. They called it practicality instead of cruelty, speaking with calm voices that somehow hurt more than shouting ever could. The old man finally slowed as the road curved toward a gentle stream sparkling beneath afternoon sunlight. He offered her a small canteen filled with cool water before pouring one for himself. "You have not asked my name," he observed with a soft smile. Evelyn accepted the canteen carefully. "I was not certain I still had the right to ask questions." The old man studied her for a long moment before answering. "Every person has that right." He extended a weathered hand. "My name is Samuel Ashcroft." Evelyn repeated it quietly, surprised by the warmth in his voice. Samuel nodded toward the forest stretching ahead where towering evergreens swayed beneath the growing breeze. "There is still a long journey before sunset," he said. "Sometimes the road that begins with loss leads somewhere no one could have imagined." Evelyn followed his gaze into the endless green shadows between the trees, unable to believe such words could ever belong to her future, never realizing that destiny had already begun walking toward her from the opposite direction. The afternoon sun drifted lower, weaving ribbons of golden light through towering pines that lined the forgotten road, while a gentle breeze stirred the scent of cedar, damp earth, and distant wildflowers. Evelyn found herself listening to sounds she had almost forgotten existed beyond the walls of the pack that had judged her so harshly. Birds called from the branches overhead without fear. A small stream hurried over smooth stones beside the trail, its clear water catching flashes of sunlight that danced like scattered pieces of glass. The forest did not care that she had been rejected. It did not whisper behind her back or measure her worth against another person's expectations. For the first time in many months, the silence surrounding her felt peaceful instead of lonely. Samuel walked beside the old wagon with steady, patient steps, allowing the aging horse to choose its own comfortable pace. He seemed to know every bend in the road, greeting ancient oak trees and weathered stone markers with the quiet familiarity of someone returning home after many journeys. Evelyn studied him whenever he looked away. His clothes were simple, his boots carried years of dust, yet there was an unmistakable calm about him that reminded her of the village elders she had admired as a child. He never treated her like property, even though the law now claimed she belonged to him. Instead, he asked if she wished to rest whenever the road became uneven, offered fresh bread when the afternoon grew long, and spoke only when conversation came naturally. The kindness confused her almost as much as it comforted her. As they rounded another curve, Samuel slowed beside a weathered wooden bridge stretching across a narrow creek. The horse stopped on its own, lowering its head to drink from the cool water below. Samuel reached into the wagon and removed a neatly folded wool blanket before handing it to Evelyn. The mountain air would grow colder after sunset, he explained with a gentle smile. Evelyn accepted it carefully, running her fingers across the soft fabric. She could not remember the last time someone had given her something without expecting labor or obedience in return. Gratitude settled quietly inside her chest, fragile enough that she almost feared acknowledging it. After several peaceful minutes, an unexpected sound drifted through the forest. It was faint at first, almost hidden beneath the rustling leaves. Hoofbeats. Fast. More than one rider. Samuel lifted his head immediately, his expression remaining calm even as his eyes sharpened with quiet attention. Evelyn heard them now as well. The rhythm echoed between the trees before disappearing again, as though whoever traveled nearby had changed direction. She glanced toward the dense woods, where shadows stretched longer beneath the towering pines. Nothing moved. Even the birds had fallen strangely silent. Samuel rested one hand on the wagon rail, listening carefully before speaking in a voice barely louder than the wind. Sometimes the forest warns those willing to hear it. Evelyn looked toward him, unsure what he meant, but before she could ask, another sound reached them. This time it was not hoofbeats. It was the distant cry of someone calling for help, carried across the valley so faintly that it almost disappeared before reaching the bridge. The voice held urgency without panic, fading into silence as quickly as it had appeared. Evelyn felt every instinct inside her awaken at once. She had spent years comforting frightened children and injured animals, and something inside her recognized genuine desperation. She looked toward the narrow trail leading deeper into the trees. Samuel followed her gaze without surprise. "I wondered," he said softly, "whether you would hear it too." Evelyn tightened the blanket around her shoulders, her heart beating a little faster than before. The road ahead remained open, safe, and familiar. The hidden trail disappeared into shadows where the fading sunlight could no longer reach. She did not know who needed help. She did not know what waited beyond those trees. She only knew that somewhere ahead, a stranger was waiting for someone willing to choose compassion one more time. Samuel did not urge her either forward or back. He simply waited beside the weathered wagon, his calm gray eyes resting on Evelyn as though the choice belonged entirely to her. The distant voice came again, weaker now, carried through the towering pines by the evening breeze before fading into the hush of the forest. Evelyn drew a slow breath, remembering every lesson her father had once taught her. Kindness was never measured by convenience. It mattered most when helping someone required courage. She looked toward Samuel with quiet uncertainty. If someone truly needs help, I cannot pretend I did not hear them. A faint smile touched the old man's face, not one of surprise but of quiet approval. I hoped that would be your answer. Without another word, he loosened the horse's reins and secured the wagon beneath the shade of an enormous oak tree. He handed Evelyn a small lantern, though daylight still lingered beneath the fading sky. "The trees become darker sooner than the road," he said gently. "Stay close." Together they stepped onto the narrow trail winding between ancient pines whose trunks rose like silent pillars into the deep green canopy overhead. Moss softened every fallen stone, and the cool air carried the fresh scent of cedar mixed with damp leaves left by countless autumns. Sunlight filtered through scattered branches in thin golden ribbons that painted the forest floor with shifting patterns. The farther they walked, the quieter the world became. Even the familiar songs of birds disappeared, replaced only by the whisper of branches moving high above them. Evelyn noticed broken fern leaves beside the trail and fresh hoofprints pressed into the damp earth. Several riders had passed through recently, moving quickly enough to leave deep impressions in the soil. Samuel knelt briefly beside the tracks before standing again without concern. "They were traveling in haste," he observed softly. "Sometimes haste leaves important things behind." Evelyn did not fully understand his meaning, but something about the trail made her senses sharpen. The forest itself felt watchful, as though waiting for an unseen moment to unfold. After several more minutes, the path opened into a quiet clearing surrounded by tall pines. At its center stood an abandoned hunting cabin with weathered wooden walls, and a stone chimney darkened by many winters. Smoke no longer drifted from its roof, yet one shutter swung gently in the breeze, tapping softly against the wall with slow rhythmic knocks. The sound echoed through the clearing with surprising loneliness. Evelyn paused near the doorway as another faint voice reached her ears, this time unmistakably close. It was not a cry of panic but the strained call of someone exhausted after a long struggle to remain standing. She instinctively stepped toward the cabin before Samuel lightly raised one hand. "Go carefully," he advised. "Fear can hide inside good people just as easily as inside dangerous ones." Evelyn nodded and approached the entrance with measured steps, her heart beating steadily against her ribs. She gently pushed the weathered door open, its old hinges creaking into the quiet evening air. Cool shadows filled the small room, but one narrow beam of sunlight reached through the dusty window and fell across the figure of a tall man seated against the far stone wall. His dark travel cloak concealed most of his clothing beneath layers of road dust, and his head remained lowered as though every breath demanded careful effort. One gloved hand rested across his shoulder while the other remained loosely curled against the wooden floor beside him. Although his face was partly hidden beneath the edge of his hood, one detail caught Evelyn's attention immediately. Resting beside him was a simple silver signet ring engraved with the image of a wolf beneath a crescent moon, a symbol she had seen only once as a child in an old history book describing the royal house of the Northern Territories. She did not yet understand why such a ring would be lying forgotten inside an abandoned cabin in the middle of the forest, but something deep within her quietly whispered that the road she had begun that morning had already carried her far beyond ordinary fate. For several long seconds neither of them spoke. Evelyn remained near the doorway, allowing the stranger to notice her before she took another step. The man slowly lifted his head, revealing a face marked more by exhaustion than fear. Dark hair fell loosely across his forehead, and beneath the shadow of his hood, a pair of striking silver eyes met hers with calm, careful awareness. They were not the eyes of someone asking for sympathy. They were the eyes of someone accustomed to carrying burdens without complaint. Even seated against the stone wall, he held himself with quiet dignity that seemed impossible to disguise. Samuel entered the cabin behind Evelyn, his footsteps slow and measured. His gaze drifted briefly toward the silver ring lying on the floor before returning to the traveler. A subtle expression crossed the old man's face, one so brief that Evelyn almost believed she had imagined it. "You have traveled far," Samuel observed. The stranger answered with a faint nod. "Far enough." His voice was low and steady, though each word carried the strain of many sleepless hours. Evelyn noticed the heavy layer of road dust covering his dark cloak and the torn edge of one leather glove. He appeared to have spent days crossing forests and mountain trails without rest. A leather satchel rested beside him, its buckle still fastened, as though whatever it carried remained more important than his own comfort. "May I help you?" Evelyn asked quietly. The stranger looked at her for a long moment before answering. "You already have." Most people would have heard someone calling and chosen the safer road. Evelyn lowered her eyes for a moment. "I know what it feels like to hope someone will come." The words escaped before she could stop them. Silence settled gently over the cabin. Outside, the wind stirred the pine branches, filling the room with the soft whisper of moving needles. Samuel walked toward the small stone fireplace where several pieces of dry wood remained stacked from an earlier traveler. Within minutes, a modest fire crackled to life, sending welcome warmth across the room. The stranger extended his hands toward the gentle heat, and for the first time Evelyn noticed how cold they had become. She removed the folded wool blanket Samuel had given her earlier and placed it carefully across the man's shoulders. He seemed surprised by the gesture. "You barely know me," he said. Evelyn offered a small smile that carried more kindness than certainty. That has never stopped someone from needing warmth. His silver eyes softened almost imperceptibly. "Then your world has not changed you as much as it tried." Samuel quietly unpacked fresh bread, dried apples, and a small flask of clean water from the wagon before placing them on the rough wooden table. The stranger accepted only a few careful bites, thanking him with sincere gratitude rather than hunger. The fading sunlight slipped lower beyond the cabin window, painting the room with shades of amber and gold. For one peaceful moment, it almost felt as though the forest had wrapped the little cabin in complete silence. Then distant hoofbeats rolled once again through the trees, louder than before. They came from more than one direction, echoing across the hills until even the horse outside lifted its head uneasily. The stranger's expression changed instantly. His calm remained, but every sense seemed suddenly alert. He stood without hesitation despite obvious fatigue and reached for the simple silver ring lying beside him, slipping it onto his finger with practiced ease. As the last ray of sunlight reflected across its engraved wolf beneath the crescent moon, Samuel bowed his head ever so slightly, as though greeting someone whose true name needed no introduction. Evelyn looked from the old man to the mysterious traveler, her heartbeat quickening with every approaching hoofbeat, realizing that both men understood something she had not yet been allowed to see. The hoofbeats grew louder until they rolled through the forest like distant thunder, then stopped all at once beyond the cabin walls. An uneasy silence followed, broken only by the gentle crackling of the fireplace and the wind brushing through the towering pines outside. Evelyn instinctively held her breath. Whoever had arrived was waiting. The stranger's silver eyes remained fixed on the door, calm yet intensely focused, while Samuel quietly stepped toward the window without disturbing the curtain. He glanced outside only briefly before returning with the same composed expression that never seemed to leave his face. "They found this place sooner than expected," he said softly. Evelyn looked from one man to the other. "Who are they?" Samuel answered with careful honesty. "People searching for someone who must not fall into the wrong hands." Before Evelyn could ask another question, a measured knock sounded against the weathered wooden door. It was neither hurried nor threatening, only deliberate. The stranger straightened his posture despite obvious fatigue and spoke in a quiet voice. "Do not open it yet." Evelyn noticed that even exhausted, he carried himself with remarkable confidence, as though responsibility had become second nature long ago. Samuel nodded in agreement, then turned toward Evelyn. "Stay behind us." She wanted to obey, yet another faint sound reached her ears before anyone else reacted. It came from outside the cabin, not from the front entrance but somewhere beyond the rear wall near the old stable. It was soft, frightened, and unmistakably the cry of a child. Evelyn's head turned immediately. The stranger noticed her expression. "What is it?" She listened again. There it was, barely audible beneath the whispering trees. "Someone else is outside." Samuel frowned slightly. "I heard only the riders." Evelyn stepped toward the back window, her heart beating faster. Through the fading light she caught sight of a small figure crouching beside a fallen log, wrapped in a dusty travel cloak several sizes too large. The child looked no older than 8 years old, hugging a frightened hunting dog that trembled beside them. Neither appeared injured, only terrified and unsure where to run. Without stopping to think, Evelyn reached for the back door. "Wait," the stranger called quietly. "You do not know what is waiting beyond that door." Evelyn rested her hand on the latch and looked back at him. "I know what it feels like when everyone else walks away." She opened the door before fear could convince her otherwise. Cool evening air rushed into the cabin carrying the scent of pine and fresh rain drifting down from the mountains. The child looked up immediately, wide blue eyes filled with relief and uncertainty. The hunting dog pressed closer against the child's side but did not growl. Evelyn slowly knelt a few feet away, careful not to frighten either of them. "You are safe," she said gently. "No one here wants to hurt you." The child hesitated before taking one cautious step forward. At that same moment, the stranger appeared quietly behind Evelyn, watching the scene unfold from the doorway. His expression changed in a way she had not seen before. The guarded distance in his silver eyes gave way to unmistakable relief, warm enough to soften every sharp line on his face. Samuel noticed it as well but remained silent. Evelyn reached out her hand, offering nothing except patience. After a long pause, the child accepted it. The frightened dog relaxed beside them, resting its head against Evelyn's knee as though recognizing a kindness it had been searching for all day. Standing just behind her, the mysterious traveler whispered so softly that only Samuel could clearly hear the words. "She chooses compassion before caution." Exactly as the old prophecy described. Samuel lowered his head ever so slightly, while Evelyn remained completely unaware that a single simple act of kindness had just confirmed something far greater than chance. The little girl clung to Evelyn's hand as though she had finally found something solid in a world that had been shifting beneath her feet all day. Her oversized cloak slipped from one shoulder, revealing simple traveling clothes covered in dust from miles of forest trails. The hunting dog stayed close beside her, its golden eyes watching every movement outside the cabin with quiet loyalty. Evelyn smiled gently before kneeling to meet the child's gaze. "What is your name?" The girl hesitated, glancing toward the silver-eyed traveler standing in the doorway. Only after he gave the smallest reassuring nod did she answer in a trembling voice. "Clara." Evelyn brushed a loose strand of chestnut hair away from the child's face. "You have been very brave today, Clara." The words seemed to loosen something inside the little girl. She nodded quickly, blinking back tears she had tried so hard not to shed. "I did not want to get lost," she whispered. He told me to stay hidden until someone kind found me. Evelyn looked up toward the traveler with quiet curiosity, but before she could ask another question, another firm knock echoed against the cabin's front door. This time it was followed by a calm voice from outside. "We know someone is inside. We are not your enemies." The traveler closed his eyes briefly as though recognizing the speaker. Samuel remained completely composed. "Do you know them?" he asked. The traveler gave a slow nod. "If I am right, they have been searching since dawn." Evelyn noticed that despite his confidence, weariness still lingered in every careful breath he took. Without thinking, she crossed the room and gently adjusted the wool blanket around his shoulders once more. "You should sit," she said quietly. "You have not fully recovered." A faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. "You continue worrying about strangers." Evelyn answered with complete sincerity. "Someone once told me that kindness matters most when it is inconvenient." Samuel's eyes softened with unmistakable pride, though he said nothing. Outside, the waiting riders remained patient. No demands followed. No raised voices disturbed the peaceful forest. Only the soft shifting of horses and the rustle of pine branches drifted through the cool evening air. Finally, the traveler stepped toward the entrance and rested one hand upon the wooden latch. Before opening it, he turned toward Evelyn. "Whatever happens next, thank you." She looked puzzled. "For what?" His silver eyes held hers for a long moment. "For seeing people before judging them." He slowly opened the door. Evening light spilled into the cabin, bathing the wooden floor in warm amber. Beyond the doorway stood 6 riders wearing dark green traveling cloaks marked with the embroidered crest of a silver wolf beneath a crescent moon. The moment they saw the man standing before them, every one of them dismounted without hesitation. They removed their gloves, bowed their heads deeply, and placed one hand across their hearts in perfect unison. No one spoke at first. The forest itself seemed to fall silent around them. Evelyn watched the unexpected display with growing confusion. These disciplined riders were not greeting an ordinary traveler. They were honoring someone whose presence commanded effortless respect. The eldest among them finally raised his head, relief shining across his weathered face. "We have searched every road from the western pass to the river crossings," he said with quiet emotion. "Thank goodness we found you before nightfall." Evelyn looked from the riders to the mysterious stranger, then to Samuel, who simply folded his hands and lowered his gaze with complete reverence. A realization hovered just beyond her understanding, as close as the evening breeze brushing through the pines, waiting for a single moment to reveal the truth that would change every path her life had ever known. The words spoken by the gray-haired commander hung gently in the evening air, and for a brief moment no one moved. The riders remained bowed with unwavering respect while the mysterious traveler regarded them with quiet composure rather than surprise. Evelyn stood beside Clara, one hand resting lightly upon the little girl's shoulder, unable to understand why seasoned warriors would greet a weary stranger with such solemn devotion. The hunting dog settled peacefully at her feet, its anxious breathing finally slowing as though it recognized familiar faces. The traveler stepped outside the cabin and looked across the small gathering, his silver eyes reflecting the fading light beneath the towering pines. "Did anyone follow you?" he asked calmly. "No, you're—" The commander caught himself before finishing the sentence, lowering his voice instead. "The roads have been secured." Evelyn noticed the hesitation. It was small, almost invisible, but it carried the weight of a title left intentionally unspoken. Samuel quietly approached the doorway and placed another piece of wood onto the fire before turning toward the commander with a respectful nod. The older man's calm expression suggested that nothing unfolding before them had come as a surprise. Evelyn looked at Samuel with growing confusion. "You knew who he was," she whispered. Samuel answered without denying it. "I knew only that destiny sometimes arrives wearing ordinary clothes." The traveler glanced back toward Evelyn, almost apologetically. "I had hoped to remain anonymous a little longer." Before she could respond, Clara suddenly released Evelyn's hand and hurried toward him. Without hesitation, he knelt to meet the child's embrace, wrapping one protective arm around her shoulders. The little girl buried her face against his cloak, and for the first time since Evelyn had found her, she smiled without fear. "I knew you would come back," Clara whispered. His expression softened with unmistakable affection. I promised I would. Evelyn watched the exchange carefully. The warmth in his voice was genuine, effortless, and completely different from the guarded restraint he had shown only minutes before. Whatever position he held, kindness seemed as natural to him as authority. One of the younger riders stepped forward carrying a folded dark cloak trimmed with silver thread. He respectfully presented it to the traveler, who accepted it with a grateful nod before fastening it across his shoulders. As the heavy fabric settled into place, an embroidered crest became visible upon the clasp. It matched the silver wolf beneath the crescent moon engraved on his ring, only far more intricate, woven with remarkable craftsmanship that reflected the final rays of the setting sun. Evelyn remembered the old history book she had once borrowed from her father, its pages describing the royal family whose crest had remained unchanged for generations. Her heartbeat quickened. The commander finally lifted his eyes toward Evelyn. His expression held gratitude rather than suspicion. "Miss Carter," he said respectfully, surprising her by knowing her name. "Our deepest thanks for offering shelter when others might have turned away." Evelyn blinked in confusion. "I only did what anyone should have done." Several riders exchanged knowing smiles, as though they understood how rare those words truly were. The traveler looked at her with quiet admiration before drawing a slow breath. "You believe that?" he said softly. "That is exactly why this matters." He removed one leather glove and extended his hand toward the commander, who immediately produced a beautifully crafted sword wrapped in dark blue cloth. The traveler rested his palm upon its polished hilt for only a moment. No grand speech followed. No dramatic announcement filled the clearing. The gesture alone was enough. Every rider dropped to one knee in perfect unison, lowering their heads with complete loyalty. Even Samuel bowed deeply beside the cabin steps. Evelyn remained standing beside Clara, the only person still unaware of the full truth, until the commander finally raised his voice with unmistakable pride. "Welcome home, Your Majesty. The Northern Territories have awaited the return of King Lucian Blackwood." Evelyn felt the world tilt beneath her feet without the ground ever moving. King Lucian Blackwood. The name echoed through every story she had heard as a child, whispered around winter fires and spoken with quiet respect by travelers passing through her village. Some described him as an unshakable ruler, whose wisdom had united rival packs. Others insisted his presence alone could silence a crowded hall. Never once had she imagined that she would offer bread, water, and a wool blanket to the very man whose crest flew above every royal fortress in the Northern Territories. Heat rushed to her cheeks as she instinctively stepped backward. "Your Majesty," she whispered, her voice barely louder than the evening breeze. "I did not know." Lucian turned toward her before anyone else could speak. The silver in his eyes reflected the last traces of sunset, yet there was no trace of offense in his expression. "I know," he answered gently. "That is precisely why your kindness mattered." The surrounding riders remained respectfully silent, allowing only the forest itself to fill the space between those words. Samuel watched Evelyn with quiet reassurance, as though encouraging her not to let fear replace the compassion that had guided every decision she had made that day. Clara slipped her small hand into Lucian's, smiling with the complete trust only a child could give. "I told them you would find me," she said proudly. Lucian brushed a loose curl away from her forehead. "And you were brave enough to wait." The commander stepped forward carrying a folded map and several sealed letters tucked inside a leather case. "Your Majesty, the council has been searching every province. They feared the escort had become separated after the storm blocked the western pass." Lucian accepted the case with a thoughtful nod. "The storm merely changed our route." His gaze shifted naturally back toward Evelyn. Sometimes an unexpected road leads exactly where it should. Evelyn lowered her eyes, still struggling to understand why a king would speak to her with such warmth. "I have nothing to offer someone like you," she admitted quietly. "You already have," Lucian replied without hesitation. "Titles cannot teach compassion. Wealth cannot purchase integrity. You offered both without expecting anything in return." His words settled over the clearing more powerfully than any royal decree could have. Several of the riders exchanged respectful glances, clearly recognizing that such praise was not given lightly. Samuel smiled to himself, saying nothing. He had been waiting for this moment long before Evelyn had entered Iron Hollow Market that morning. As twilight deepened, lanterns were lit beside the horses, casting soft circles of golden light beneath the towering pines. The atmosphere no longer carried uncertainty but quiet relief. Fresh water was shared among the travelers, blankets were distributed, and Clara laughed as the hunting dog chased drifting leaves across the clearing. For the first time that entire day, Evelyn noticed peace settling over every face around her. Yet one question continued pressing against her heart. She finally gathered enough courage to ask it. If you are the king, why were you traveling without announcing who you were? Lucian looked toward the darkening forests before answering. Because a ruler learns more when people reveal who they truly are instead of reacting to a crown. He paused briefly before meeting her eyes once more. Today I discovered exactly what I needed to find. Evelyn felt her heartbeat quicken again, uncertain what he meant, but something in the calm certainty of his voice made the words linger long after they were spoken. Above them, the first stars appeared between the pine branches while the crescent moon slowly climbed into the evening sky, silently watching two very different lives begin to move toward the same extraordinary destiny. The camp settled into a peaceful rhythm beneath the rising moon, but Evelyn could not quiet the questions turning through her mind. Only that morning she had stood on an auction platform believing her future had ended. Now she sat beside a small campfire surrounded by the royal guard, sharing warm soup while the king himself spoke with his commanders only a few yards away. Nothing about the day felt real. Samuel quietly joined her, lowering himself onto a fallen log with the slow ease of someone who had spent a lifetime traveling forgotten roads. You are wondering why all of this happened, he said gently. Evelyn nodded. I still do not understand why you bought me. Samuel smiled into the dancing firelight. Because some treasures are hidden beneath the opinions of frightened people. Before Evelyn could answer, one of the royal messengers approached with visible urgency, stopping several respectful steps away from King Lucian. He bowed deeply before presenting a sealed parchment bearing the crest of Silver Ridge Pack. Lucian accepted it, broke the wax seal, and silently read the contents. His expression remained composed, but the silver in his eyes grew noticeably colder. The commander standing beside him spoke carefully. Bad news, Your Majesty? Lucian folded the letter with deliberate precision. Interesting news. He turned toward Evelyn. Would you come here for a moment? She hesitated only briefly before walking across the clearing. Every member of the royal escort instinctively stepped aside to give her room, a gesture that made her even more uncomfortable. Lucian handed her the parchment. Read it. Evelyn carefully unfolded the letter. Her hands trembled as she recognized the handwriting of the Silver Ridge Council. The message congratulated the royal court on recovering safely from the disrupted journey, before politely requesting payment for what they described as the lawful transfer of an unwanted omega. The council praised its own loyalty to the crown, and even suggested that selling Evelyn had benefited everyone involved. She reached the final line and felt her heart sink. They had signed the letter with complete confidence, believing they had earned royal favor through their decision. Evelyn slowly lowered the parchment. They truly believe they did the right thing. Lucian studied her face instead of the letter. What do you believe? She remained silent for several long seconds. The old Evelyn might have answered with bitterness. She might have wished for humiliation to be returned with humiliation. Instead, she quietly folded the parchment and handed it back. I believe they never saw my value. That is sad for them more than it is for me. The commander looked genuinely surprised by her answer. Samuel simply closed his eyes for a brief moment, as though hearing exactly what he had expected. Lucian accepted the letter once again, and for the first time since revealing his identity, a warm smile reached his eyes. Compassion after injustice is the rarest kind of strength, he said. You have lost much, yet you have not allowed your heart to become smaller. The evening breeze carried the scent of pine through the clearing as every rider listened in respectful silence. Lucian looked toward the distant mountains where the lights of the capital would appear by dawn. Prepare the horses, he instructed calmly. At first light we return to Blackwood Citadel. The commander bowed. And what of Silver Ridge Pack, Your Majesty? Lucian's answer was steady and without anger. They will have the opportunity to explain their choices before the royal court. Evelyn looked up at him, uncertain what that would mean. Lucian met her gaze with quiet confidence. Every person deserves to be seen truthfully, he said. Tomorrow the entire kingdom will learn who you really are. Morning sunlight poured across the mountain roads as the royal procession made its way toward Blackwood Citadel, turning the morning mist into ribbons of gold that drifted between the towering pines. Evelyn rode quietly in a comfortable carriage beside Clara, while Samuel sat across from them with the peaceful expression of a man watching long-awaited events unfold exactly as they should. Every few miles, villages appeared along the royal highway, and each time the people recognized the silver wolf banners, they respectfully paused their work to bow as King Lucian passed. Evelyn noticed something that surprised her even more than the bows themselves. Whenever children gathered near the roadside, Lucian slowed his horse just enough to return every smile or wave with a gentle nod. The fearsome ruler described in countless stories carried himself with quiet dignity rather than cold distance. Clara leaned closer to Evelyn and whispered with a grin, "He always remembers names." Evelyn smiled politely, assuming the child was exaggerating, until an elderly farmer stepped forward holding his cap against his chest. "Good morning, Your Majesty." Lucian immediately answered, "It is good to see you again, Mr. Harper. I hope your grandson is enjoying the fishing rod I promised him last spring." The old farmer's eyes widened with gratitude. "He treasures it every day, Your Majesty." As the procession continued, Evelyn watched the exchange in thoughtful silence. This was not a king who ruled through fear alone. He remembered ordinary people, listened when they spoke, and somehow carried the burdens of an entire kingdom without allowing power to harden his heart. By late morning the towering walls of Blackwood Citadel appeared above the cliffs, rising from solid gray stone like part of the mountains themselves. Massive gates carved with the royal crest stood open, and rows of guards in polished uniforms formed a respectful path leading into the grand courtyard. Bells echoed across the fortress as the king returned home. Servants, advisors, scholars, and soldiers gathered along the entrance, lowering their heads as Lucian dismounted. Evelyn stepped carefully from the carriage, expecting to remain unnoticed among so many important people. Instead, Lucian turned before anyone else moved and extended his hand toward her with effortless courtesy. She hesitated only briefly before accepting it. Murmurs spread quietly through the gathered crowd. No one questioned the king's decision, yet many curious eyes followed the young Omega walking beside him. Lucian did not release her hand until they reached the center of the courtyard. The royal steward approached and bowed deeply. "Your Majesty, the council chamber is prepared, and representatives from Silver Ridge Pack have already arrived in response to your summons." Evelyn's heart skipped. They were already here. Lucian looked toward the towering doors leading into the great hall before turning back to her. "You have nothing to fear," he said in a calm voice that only she could hear. "Today no one will speak for you except the truth." Samuel smiled quietly from a respectful distance, while Clara slipped her small hand into Evelyn's free hand as though offering silent encouragement. Together they crossed the courtyard beneath hundreds of watchful eyes, and for the first time since the day of her rejection, Evelyn did not feel invisible. She walked forward with her head held high, not because she had suddenly become powerful, but because someone had finally chosen to see her worth before asking about her past. Beyond the towering oak doors, the royal court waited, and with it the moment that would forever change how the kingdom remembered the girl everyone else had once been willing to forget. The great hall of Blackwood Citadel stood in complete silence as King Lucian entered beneath towering stone arches where sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, painting the polished marble floor with soft shades of blue and silver. Noble families, military commanders, advisors, and representatives from every major pack filled the chamber, rising together as the king approached the throne. Evelyn followed several respectful steps behind him, her simple traveling dress standing in quiet contrast to the richly embroidered robes surrounding her. She felt countless eyes settle upon her. Yet for the first time in her life, those curious glances no longer carried open contempt. They carried questions. At the center of the hall stood the delegation from Silver Ridge Pack. The council leader who had signed the letter stepped forward with practiced confidence, bowing deeply before the throne. "Your Majesty," he began with an easy smile, "we are honored to have assisted the crown by transferring an Omega who could no longer contribute to our community." Evelyn recognized several familiar faces standing behind him, including the young Alpha who had rejected her beneath the full moon months before. None of them met her eyes. Lucian remained standing rather than taking his throne. His calm expression revealed nothing. "Tell this court," he said evenly, "why you believed she had no value." The council leader answered without hesitation. "She possessed no influence, no exceptional gift, and no suitable bond. We believed releasing her was the most practical decision for the future of the pack." A quiet murmur drifted through the gathered nobles. Lucian slowly turned toward Evelyn. "Miss Carter," he said gently, "during the time you lived among them, how many people did you help?" She looked surprised by the question. "I never counted." Samuel stepped forward from among the royal advisors, carrying a worn leather journal. "I did." The old man opened its carefully preserved pages. Over the past 3 years, Evelyn Carter voluntarily cared for 12 elderly residents during winter illness, repaired homes after 2 severe storms, taught reading lessons to 14 orphan children, rescued livestock after flooding, and regularly delivered food to widows who had no surviving family. The hall fell completely still. Samuel closed the journal with quiet dignity. None of these acts were requested. None were rewarded. Several noblewomen exchanged thoughtful glances while members of the royal council lowered their eyes toward the marble floor. Lucian's silver gaze returned to the Silver Ridge representatives. "You claim she offered nothing of value." His voice never rose, yet every word carried unmistakable authority. "You measured strength only by status and power while overlooking compassion, integrity, and courage. Those qualities cannot be purchased, inherited, or demanded. They are chosen." The council leader struggled to answer, but no words came. Even the young alpha who had once rejected Evelyn slowly lowered his head, unable to defend the decision that now seemed painfully small beneath the weight of truth. Lucian stepped down from the dais and stopped directly before Evelyn. "When I wore ordinary clothes," he said for the entire court to hear, "she offered warmth before asking my name, safety before knowing my title, and kindness without expecting reward. She judged character before position. That is the rarest strength a ruler can hope to find." He extended his hand toward her once more. Evelyn hesitated only a heartbeat before placing her hand in his. The great hall remained so quiet that the gentle rustle of their sleeves seemed louder than any trumpet could have been. Looking into her eyes with calm certainty, Lucian spoke words that echoed to every corner of the chamber. "From this day forward, no one will remember you as the woman they cast aside. They will remember you as the woman whose heart reminded a kingdom what true greatness looks like." For a long moment no one in the great hall moved. The silence that followed King Lucian's words carried more power than applause ever could. Sunlight poured through the stained glass windows, scattering silver and blue across the polished floor until it seemed as though moonlight itself had entered the royal court. Evelyn stood with her hand resting gently in Lucian's, still struggling to believe that the frightened Omega who had walked onto an auction platform only a day before was the same woman now standing beside the ruler of the Northern Territories. She searched his face, expecting to find hesitation, but there was none. His silver eyes held only quiet certainty. Lucian slowly turned toward the assembled nobles, advisors, military commanders, and representatives from every pack. His voice remained calm, yet every person in the chamber listened with complete attention. A kingdom becomes stronger when it recognizes character before appearance, compassion before status, and integrity before pride. Yesterday this woman was judged by those who never cared to know her. Today I judge her by what I have witnessed with my own eyes. He released her hand only long enough to accept a small velvet case from the royal steward. The steward opened it with careful hands, revealing an elegant silver circlet adorned with delicate branches, and a single moonstone resting at its center. It was beautiful without being extravagant, graceful rather than imposing. Lucian accepted the circlet and stepped back toward Evelyn. She instinctively shook her head, overwhelmed by everything that had already happened. "Your Majesty," she whispered softly, "I have done nothing to deserve this." A warm smile touched his face. "You still believe kindness must earn permission to matter," he replied. "It does not." With gentle care, he placed the circlet upon her head. The hall remained completely silent until the final ray of afternoon sunlight caught the moonstone, filling it with a soft silver glow. Then one by one, the members of the royal court bowed their heads. Not because they had been commanded to do so, but because respect had become the only honest response left. Samuel closed his eyes with quiet gratitude, while Clara clapped her hands with innocent delight before hugging Evelyn around the waist. Tears gathered in Evelyn's eyes, not from sadness but from the overwhelming realization that someone had finally seen the person she had always been. Lucian looked toward the gathered court one final time. "From this day forward," he declared with unwavering conviction, "Evelyn Carter will stand beside this throne under my personal protection. She will be honored not for the circumstances she survived, but for the heart she chose to keep despite them." His gaze returned to Evelyn, and his voice softened enough that only those nearest could hear every word. "Yesterday they measured your worth with a single silver coin. Today I measure it by the future of this kingdom." Evelyn looked across the hall toward the representatives of Silver Ridge Pack. She felt no desire for revenge, no satisfaction in seeing their lowered eyes. Instead, she offered them the same quiet grace she had offered strangers in a lonely forest cabin. In that moment, she understood something her father had tried to teach her years before. A person's true value had never depended on the price others placed upon them. It had always lived inside the choices they made when no reward was guaranteed. Outside the towering windows, the evening bells of Blackwood Citadel began to ring across the mountains as people gathered in the streets below, welcoming their king home. Their joyful voices floated upward on the cool breeze, blending with the songs of returning birds beneath the fading light. Evelyn lifted her eyes toward the horizon, where the first stars quietly appeared above the distant pines, and for the first time in her life, the future no longer looked like something to fear. It looked like a place where kindness had finally found its rightful home, and where the girl once forgotten by everyone would forever be remembered as the queen who first earned a crown long before anyone placed one upon her head.